Thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you very much to la Federazione Unitaria Italiana Scrittori, also the Italian Writers Union, which will be publishing a collection of Maureen's poems in English and in Italian, either late next year or early next. And we're very grateful to them for their sponsorship of this event and making this event possible. As well, of course, as we're grateful to the Centre for Life Writing Research at King's College London, which has a very special interest and has taken very great care of Maureen's work, her legacy, her archive over the last 7 years. 7 years which has been spent putting together the project that we're very delighted to finally launch tonight, and which I'm going to share with you on screen now, which is a special digital collection related to the works of Maureen Duffy on the Centre for Life Writing Research at King's College London's website, Strandlines. Strandlines is a digital community which aims to share lives and stories, communities on the Strand. The Strand is a part of London where King's College London itself is located. Maureen Duffy attended King's College between 1953 and 1956. And in 2013, we held a conference to celebrate Maureen's 80th birthday, which brought together people from all over the world, contributing papers, poems, reflections, personal memories, stories. And we collated all that material in order to put it on this website, Strandlines.
Right,
that
yeah.
was 7 years ago. Oh, right. Maureen, welcome back. So finally, we're here with Maureen. And Maureen, have you been listening?
No, because I've been talking to Robin.
Okay.
Following her directions.
Okay. Well, I was just giving an introduction in your absence to this digital collection, Strandlines, which documents all the material from the conference that we held to celebrate your 80th at King's all those years ago. So we held this conference, and in 2013 we then held a further event celebrating Maureen's archive, which is held at the college in 2015, which was a collaboration with Liz Mathews, who also joins us today. Liz is a lettering artist who has a very special and profound relationship with Maureen through her work, which she's going to talk about later on. So I'll save a greater introduction to Liz until then. We then held an event in 2017, which was more focused on Maureen's world service as a writer. Maureen, as well as having published over 40 works and 16 plays, has also been a huge activist supporting authors' rights all over the world. She's created many organisations making sure authors are defended and paid, and continues to do this until today. I've worked very closely with Maureen over the last 10 years building the International Authors Forum, which brings together authors from all over the world through their organisations in order to give them representation globally and solidarity in protecting their rights and making sure that they can get paid for what they do so that they can go on doing it. So in 2017 at King's College, we gathered and we held the event Postcards from the International Authors Forum, where we heard from authors and their working conditions in Sudan, in the Solomon Islands, South Korea, Iraq, Israel, Italy. It was a really wonderful panoply of perspectives, and it was a very fascinating event, hearing about the conditions in which and the cultures working to sustain their identity, their languages, and the challenges they face. So you can read about those 3 events on the Strandline website, on the Strandline's website, and you can also read about some projects inspired by Maureen's more recent work, in particular her poem Mother Tongue, which is published in the 2020 collection Wanderer, which we're going to talk about when we get to Maureen very soon. And so the 2019 section describes some community initiatives in London, a play which was put on at the Bush Theatre in Shepherd's Bush called Babylon Beyond Borders. So you can read the voices of some women from the community chorus who participated in that show, talking about their experiences with a diverse range of heritages, but all living in London. And then a second initiative took place at Shepherd's Bush Families Project, which is a wonderful organisation in West London, which provides support, housing support and social support, and a huge range of services to families in West London who are homeless or who are struggling with settling in London. And at that event, we used the material from the postcards in workshops with the children that come to that centre, and they produced some really amazing artworks and responses, poetry. Again, I think presenting this many coloured, many textured beauty that exists within London, and that we are that shines through so well in Maureen's work. So I'd encourage you at your leisure to read that material there if you're interested in Maureen's work. Many facets of it are celebrated on the Strandline's website, and we're really pleased that after 7 years, finally it's there and it's available for everybody to access. But now I'd like to turn to Maureen, and I think we're going to get to the poetry. Maureen's latest collection, published by Pottery Press in January this year, is called Wanderer, and she's going to read us the title poem from that collection, which is called Wanderer. Thank you, Maureen.
Well, thank you everybody for, in a sense, coming, in the strange sense in which we have to use words this year. Wanderer really took off from the Old English poem of the same name, Wanderer. But the Wanderer in the Old English is a poet, song writer and poet, a bard in fact, who has lost his master. And such was the system in those days, that you attached yourself to a master and his court, and he provided for you in return for you writing songs. And if you lost his favour, then you were out in the cold. And that caused me to think about that we are such a nomadic people, such a nomadic species indeed, and that the refugee experience in many ways echoes that of the lost bard. After the houses were broken to rubble and dust, the streets where the children played, bloody with death from the skies, Palmyra sacked and ransacked, the arches, work of earlier men, toppled, and the museum, where once I had charge of jewels in gold and silver, of rich carvings and many-coloured gemstones, shattered like the glass cases housing antiquity. We fled from our land, over the border, north, and then the long walk, until we came to the shore in a little cove, scrambling over rocks, wading through pebble-shifting shallows. "I will take you," the man said, "across the sea for a price. Look, you can see the island not far over the waters, where you will be safe and free." So I paid him. The waves were cold, grey and rough, the boat small. "It is close by, just a little way, so I leave you now." But the waves grew higher. Bitter rain and hail beat upon our heads. We huddled in the boat, but there were too many of us. The waves came over the side. We feared to sink. Water waited for us with its chilling embrace. I tried to row with my hands while the women bailed with theirs. The seabird flew over our heads, crying as we sank lower. Then suddenly, out of the murk, a boat coming towards us. We stood up, waving our arms, cried out like the seabird. But once the boat went down on our one side as we rushed to the other, begging to be saved. The chill waters closed over me. But I strove upwards, and there a hand reaching down, holding me fast from sinking back, pulling me up until I lay on the hard deck, saved as others sank from sight into the cold embrace of the sea. On shore, kind people came with blankets to wrap our shivering bodies, filled our bellies with food until the guards came with guns, herding us into a cage. A man cried out, "We are not animals, we are human." Then we were tagged, docketed, like cattle for sale. Many days we waited, only wanting to go on, until at last they opened our cage, let us walk out to take to the air and see the sea, this time below us, only to travel the long road again, towards the future, carrying the children with all we had in the world on our backs, and so on northward, the air growing colder. I had not thought exile would be so chill. Countries closed barriers against us. We tore them down with our hands, climbed over however high they built, beat against them until we came to a land where we thought to find our future. But there was no respite. Cold faces were turned towards us, blank eyes. We were the lost of the world, with only the memory of a once happier time. We have become ghosts, wandering a continent, faceless, transient, passing through, on and on, echoing the human condition, travelling from birth to death. yet still longing, believing that between there must be life, vibrant, hopeful, that keeps us walking.
Thank you, Maureen. And before we hear more poetry from Maureen, we're going to hear a response to this poem from Liz Mathews, who we're delighted to welcome here tonight. Liz and Maureen, as I mentioned, have a very profound artistic relationship. The first of Maureen's texts that Liz set to paper was a poetry cycle of love songs, songs for Sappho, which was called Paper Wings. And that was the subject of the King's event in 2015. And that collection has recently been put on display in the British Library. It's on display in the permanent exhibition in the Treasures Gallery, alongside the Magna Carta and the manuscripts of Jane Austen, Shakespeare, Virginia Woolf, as well as the Book of Kells and other illuminated manuscripts. And it went there just before lockdown, so not many people have had a chance to see it yet, but it isn't going away, it's there permanently. So it would be wonderful if this event might encourage, when possible, an influx of visitors to go and see it there. But since that meeting, which I believe was inspired by Maureen buying a blue bowl, about which she wrote one of the love poems from Liz, who is a potter as well as a lettering artist. Liz has continued to work with Maureen's texts, and with her partner Francis Bingham, as Pottery Press, they published Wanderer, and Liz has made artists' books and settings of 5 of the poems in Wanderer. And she's going to talk about the artists' books that she's made with lines from Wanderer this evening. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Katie. Hearing Maureen read Wanderer is always going to be a very moving experience, one that reinforces the empathy and identification at the heart of the poem. When I first read the poem, I was deeply struck by this identification, and I chose those last 8 lines that express so much to make an artist's book with, setting the lines within a constructed context so that the physical book embodies the words. When I'm working on an artist's book, I often spend a long time first looking at the poem and the paper to see where elements of the book's structure could reflect aspects of the poem in terms of meaning and a flow of images, so that the book can embody the words as fully as possible. For this book, I wanted those connections to be as simple as possible, for the book to be sparse, not over-decorated, and for every mark to be meaningful. So, to begin the process, I thought about the first visual image that the poem had given me, that long walk towards safety and freedom. And I conceived the design in terms of 3 long lines, circling endlessly round a double-sided book to begin again at the beginning. I saw a long line of wanderers, a long line of watercolour to represent the vast distances of terrain to be crossed, and the words of the poem themselves in a long line, these three lines juxtaposed and mirroring each other along the book's length. Then I looked at how the book's material construction could reflect the meaning of the words in terms of the size, shape, and number of the pages and the path that they follow through the book. This book needed a linear structure, like a classic concertina fold book, but not exactly like that. I wanted more continuity than individual pages jointed together could give. So I made it from 4 long sheets of handmade paper like this. Each folded into 5 square pages, stuck 2 sheets side by side like this, with 2 more sheets back to back, and hinged at the middle joint with another sheet. This makes a long book with 5 double pages on the inside, on the first side, 4 double spread pages on the second side, plus front and back covers. And in the middle, there's a joint between the sheets, a visible joint. I set the text so that this joint falls at 2 crucial points in the poem. Here, on the first side, the valley joint, or hinged trough, becomes an abyss of nothingness, where the ghostly wanderer and the line of the terrain they wander fade into the void. And the corresponding mountaintop joint on the other side becomes the summit. The craggy high pass the wanderer must scale before they can reach the longed for sunlit lands of life on the other side. A further way to get the material to correspond with the meaning of the words is with the colour. It begins with earthy browns, turning to dry, sandy ochre tones of the parched desert. Next, fades into a faint, translucent, thin grey, disappearing to nothing at the abyss, and then turns to a watery grey blue to represent an equally inhospitable sea crossing. And only on the words longing and believing do the colours strengthen, not just in the watercolour line, but in the line of wanderers too, where the figures become more diversely coloured, brighter, more individually marked, and the line of the words reflects the line of the people across the terrain, like a mirror or like a mirage in the desert. For the lettering, and to make the marks for the people to reflect the development and movement of the words, I used some quirky lettering tools. A driftwood stick from the Thames. I hope you can see this is one of my all-time favourite lettering tools, and it's quite thickly encrusted with paint and colour. This is carved to a point by the river itself, and I picked it up on the sandy foreshore of the Thames, just down by London's South Bank. Another tool I used in this book is a wooden kebab stick. You can see that's also quite encrusted with colour. And thirdly, a wooden pottery tool, double-ended. This is usually used as a tool to make marks and textures in the surface of the clay, but I use it very often as a lettering tool. These all make great pens because the lack of a nib dip or a little well in the nib means that the colour flows quite uncontrolled from the pen, so that it goes where it wishes to on the paper. And this kind of freedom is exactly what I want with the colour. I want it to have its own kind of fluid agency, so that I'm not in too much control over it, and so that I can then work with the freedom of expression that that colour gives. The same thing applies to the tool I used to mark the people line. For this, I used a wooden clothes peg, perfectly ordinary wooden clothes peg with a spring, wire spring in the middle. Once the spring is stripped out, this becomes two absolutely lovely pens. With a pen like this, you can do all sorts of things. And with this book, I'd like to show you some of the ways that I can use it. I can use it just as a straightforward broad italic nib, but here I've used it mostly end on like this, just to mark the individual people in the line of wanderers. And I think you can see here, I can't quite see what you're seeing on the screen, so I hope this is clear. Here, the colour has flowed very thickly from the end of the tool, so that this individual marked here looks as though they're carrying a very heavy burden, perhaps a child on their back. The figure before them is marked with just a very faint residue of ink on the end of the tool, so that they're hardly visible at all. And this kind of individuality is exactly what I want from the marks that these tools can make. You can also use this tool just with its tiny corner tip to make very small marks, just to give extra detail, extra delineation, and extra individuality to each mark. The clothes peg itself is a very nice domestic reference, intimate but universal, and it brings individuality to each person in the line, each one carrying their own burden and their own history, their own life. I wanted this to reflect the poem's identification with the wanderer, not just an anonymous migrant, refugee, homeless person, but a unique, unrepeatable, individual human being, each one of us, indeed. And now I'd like to show you the book, the resulting book, page by page. Very small, so I hope that I'll get it right. We were the lost of the world, with only the memory of a once happier time. We have become ghosts, wandering continent, faceless, transient, passing through, on and on. From birth to death, yet still longing, believing that between there must be life, vibrant, hopeful, that keeps us walking.
Thank you very much, Liz. That was wonderful. I'm really taken with the idea of your finding the expression in the materials and finding that freedom of expression, letting the materials speak, which obviously you do with a wide range of materials, and Maureen does with words, which is, I think, where perhaps you meet.
Indeed, yes.
And Maureen, I don't imagine that you're reading the chat.
No.
But I wondered if at this point we've had some really some lovely feedback that I thought I'd like to share with you of your reading.
Oh.
So from a bit of an experiment, being a Zoom event, but anyway, just to give a sort of idea of the reactions and who's here as well, because you probably don't know about that either. But we have Fran Alfrey, who I'd also like to acknowledge for her enormous dedication and help putting together Strandlines. Fran is the Strandlines editor, and without her we would have never got to this point of actually managing to publish all this material. And she says, Maureen, and she is has a PhD in Anglo-Saxon, and she said, "What a poem, thank you so much." We have Christina, who you'll remember, who we've met in Geneva from the Solomon Islands, who said it was wonderful to hear a live reading of the poem. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you for listening.
Lawrence Warner, a Duffy scholar and a medievalist, who acknowledges your debt not only to the original Wanderer, but also to Piers Plowman, not forgetting that you're inspired by other medieval texts too. John Deegan is also saying hello.
Oh, John, yes.
All the way from Canada. And we have also messages from Ingrid Protz from your European Writers' Council days in Germany, and as well from Laure Schultzfield, who's also in Germany, and I think due to technical issues has actually had to leave. But she said, "This is a silent but very emotional meeting," and she says, "Thank you and stay well, everybody."
Thank you, Laura.
Maggie G is here as well, who is saying it was very powerful and beautiful. I think she's talking about Liz's work now and what care she takes, what understanding of each word and phrase she gives to your work. Jorge Comensal, a writer from Mexico, Maureen, who you'll be pleased to hear is taking up the banner of defending authors' rights in Latin America. Says it's an absolutely beautiful book. And Mimi Calvati is here.
Oh, lovely.
And she is saying of Liz, such clarity, precision and grace, a beautiful presentation. Thank you.
Oh, lovely, thank you, Mimi.
Graham Lester George says, thank you for your lovely reading, Maureen. And Titi, who comes from Ethiopia and is a friend of mine from London, said it's a very emotive piece of work. It's beautiful and that tears came to her eyes. And Claire Brandt, thank you to Claire also. She has been absolutely instrumental in ensuring that Maureen's legacy and work stays alive. She is, in fact, who we have to thank for getting us here today, for suggesting this event, and she's the co-director for the Centre for Life Writing at King's, Centre for Life Writing Research, excuse me. She says it was a powerful poem, beautifully read and so sensitively interpreted by Liz. Thank you both. And Karen who is from America and is an Afro-Ben scholar, and has a piece on strand lines. She was also present for the 2013 conference, talking about your great work on Afro-Ben. Says it's a privilege to hear Maureen read and to hear Liz's explanation, an illuminated manuscript in many senses. Karen Gevertz, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the surname. Gevertz from New Jersey. Hi Maureen, sending much love.
Hi Karen, lovely to hear from you.
So so that was, oh, and we have a message from Simone in Italy, from the Federazione Unitaria Italiana Scrittori, who says he is not so proficient in English to be able to fully appreciate the full power of your poetry, but I love trying to find and reach a bit of my natural language into your words. Thank you for this wonderful event and for your poems.
Oh, thank you. Grazie Simone. Grazie tanto.
So I think we have a truly fair field full of folk represented here tonight. And Maureen, and now we're going to move on to your next poem, which is also from the collection Wanderer. This poem is Mosaics, and Maureen, I don't know if you knew, but I didn't know until today that the 25th of November is also the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women of the United Nations, which when we hear the poem, I think we might understand a bit more about why it was such a good idea to put this event and have this reading on this day. Thank you, Maureen.
The origins of this poem lie in the wonderful mosaics in the city of Ravenna in Italy, in a church, or I'm not sure if it is a cathedrale, of Santa Pollinare in Classe. And a very kind friend brought me back the pamphlet describing exactly what was happening in all these mosaics. And what was mainly happening, sad to say, was that women were being killed in some way, or killing themselves. And curiously enough, last weekend in the Observer, I learned a new word, which I hadn't known before, femicide, meaning the murder of women. And it just seemed so appropriate to this particular poem, and sadly to what so often goes on. It was an article about this appalling number of women who have been killed in the last 2 years in the UK. So mosaics. The women of the wall were wives, mothers, daughters, or just girls of God, virgins. Lookalikes, they gazed down on us, eyes averted from the opposing line of white-robed saints carrying their heavenly crowns before them, haloed, each robe patterned a different way, as if to counter the sameness of their hallowed state, though they died differently. Picked out in shards, scales of glass and stone and tile, all shod demurely in neat red shoes, gleaming necklaces, intact. Only Agnes has the iconic lamb at her feet, gazing up at her to remind us how she died, throat slashed with a sword, an abattoir lamb to slaughter. Some refused marriage, others a pinch of incense on an idol's altar. Eugenia, in drag, became an abbot, till a woman in love with her blew her cover. Cecilia sang in her heart of chastity on her wedding day, and it took 3 blows to strike off her head. Some burned, some were pressed to death beneath boulders, one buried alive. Euphemia faced the arena's lions. They killed her, of course, but only at her right hand. Pelagia, precious pearl, just 15, imprisoned in her room, when the soldiers came for her there, threw herself from her high window into the waiting sea. While as Eulalia burned, her soul flew away in the likeness of a dove. White flowers blossomed between her lips, in spite of winter, and the falling snow refused to cover her body. Brazier, bonfire, or beheading were the emperor's decree, as he tried to hang on to the past, where he was a god among the old gods, who were all departing. Diana, back in her watery grove, training for the Olympiad. Neptune, running a surfing school. Hades, mining the dark. Jupiter, fanning the fire to keep his arrows alight. And Venus, too, flown away, drawn by her sparrow steeds, who now frolic among the branches of my city garden. It would take an empress to set the world to rights. Theodora, resplendent among her maidens, stares down from her wall, unafraid, imperial wife and mother. No one would drag her away to die, except that even Byzantium falls, leaving just their miracles of glass, stone, and tile. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. That was very powerful. And yeah, characteristically bringing together a narrative that we find all the way back then, right until today, when the UN's designated this day for the elimination of violence against women, what it's calling the shadow pandemic. And just to conclude on Wanderer, I hope those 2 readings have whetted everybody's appetite to go out and buy their copies. And I wanted to let you know that copies are available even during the pandemic by post, and particularly promoting its availability from the Owl Bookshop. Which you can find at www.owlbookshop.co.uk or email at owlbookshop@gmail.com, or you can visit it on Instagram at owl.bookshop. So I hope you will go to the Owl Bookshop literally or virtually. Thank you, Lawrence, who's sharing the link on the chat function now, doing a great job. And delve into more of the insights and riches that we find inside. However, that's not your only place to go to find more of Maureen's latest work. Maureen, you've been working on a novel.
I've worked on it. It's finished. It's just looking for a publisher. If there's one in the house, please come forward. It will be my 20th novel, and I very much hope to see it published before pandemic is over, since we have to measure time in those terms at the moment.
Can you tell us anything about it? What drove you to do it this time?
It begins with our leaving Africa around 70,000 BC. I'm a great admirer of Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens, which, if anyone hasn't read, do have a go. It's a wonderful account of how we got where we are. The novel then goes on through very different episodes of human experience, including a pandemic, because this, of course, is not the first one, ends, as you would expect, with how to escape climate change. So it's really a sort of human history in that sense, but told completely fictionalized, a lot of it told through the words and thoughts of imagined people of that particular time, whichever time we have reached, as we go down through the ages from our leaving Africa and setting out for what we now call the Middle East. Its structure is very like an earlier work of mine, part of my London trilogy, Capital, the second volume in that. I very much hope to see it in print soon, rather than in my own handwriting. But I would also like to mention that, I don't know whether you were going to, Katie, but at my advanced age, I've written my first children's book, which is being, at the moment, beautifully illustrated by Anita Joyce. I like working, as perhaps you've guessed, with artists very much. I've also done a book with Tom Hammock, which we called Lido. In a way, it's autobiographical. It's called Sadie and the Sea Dogs. Because I was born on Trafalgar Day, I always had a feeling as a child that I could be a cabin boy and go to sea. In the book, the little girl, Sadie, visits the Maritime Museum in Greenwich, which I know very well, and she falls asleep. And when she wakes up, she hears voices and goes to see where they're coming from. And all the figureheads have come alive. And they say she must go with them. And they take her through the streets of Greenwich, down to the river, and they all embark on the Cutty Sark and go off and have adventures with mermaids and dolphins and treasure troves and so on. And so I'm very much looking forward to this coming out and being able to give some copies to some small children I know. It's the age range is 4 to 11, and it will make a great Christmas book once we have it out, which we hope to do in the next few weeks. So those are my two enterprises of the moment.
I think and it's going to be published by Hikari Press.
Yes, indeed, yes.
So that's where it'll be available.
Yes.
So yes, you're very much adventuring all over times and places in everything you write. And it's made me come back to thinking again a bit about when we did that first event at King's in 2013, which we sort of subtitled In Times Like These, which was the name of your novel on the Scottish referendum, which then could be equally sort of translated in many ways into treating Brexit. And of course, well, sort of having officially Brexited in January, it's supposed to be really happening, whatever that means. But I think that In Times Like These is also a novel really at this moment to be revisited. I wonder if you've been thinking about In Times Like These, Maureen.
Yes, indeed, and rather worrying about the possible disintegration of the United Kingdom into its component parts, which I don't think the pandemic has done anything to bring closer together, but and very worried that Scotland will decide to go her own way, which of course she is entitled to do, but then what about Wales? I think Northern Ireland may be safest.
Yes, we need to celebrate our diversity, not use it as a something to divide us. And yes. So it's great that
Absolutely. I was brought up with the old socialist motto, the world is my country, to do good is my religion.
Well, thank you, because I think you've brought that very literally to life in many ways, on paper and off, in all the wonderful ways that you do. So I think it's time to turn to the audience now, but first of all, just to sort of go on with my theme of sharing what people are saying to you kind of live at the moment, we've got remarks from Marina Warner here, who says how beautiful it is. From Maria Fernanda Mendoza in Mexico, who says it's a very beautiful experience and lovely to hear Maureen's poem and Liz's intervention.
Right.
Maggie G, red shoes, so dangerous in folklore and life.
Yes. Yes.
And also picking up on the falling snow which refused to cover her body.
Yes.
she says, it's the inevitability of the lines. We already know them in our hearts because they are classic, pared down writing.
Thank you, Maggie. From you, that's very, very high praise. Thank you.
We have Ida Boucher from Italy, who thanks you for sharing your beautiful poetry and interpretation. Mimi Calvati, thanking you for your wonderful poems, always so inspiring.
Oh, Mimi.
And Marina again, who says, wonderful, Maureen, thank you. I saw those mosaics in Ravenna when I was 17, and yes, those saints, those virgin martyrs, made a deep impression on me, which your poem perfectly voices. Thank you. Much love from Marina.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Marina.
And we have Olav Stockmo.
Oh.
Greeting us from Norway.
Yes, indeed.
And who says, awesome, lovely to see you again, Maureen. Thank you for Katie for organising and for inviting me to join this truly emotional event to celebrate Maureen and her writing. May you, Maureen, and all stay healthy.
Thank you, Olaf.
And we have a review from Maggie G, who says she's read the novel and it gives you that ache of time and is transporting like all Maureen Duffy's works. It matters. Come on, publishers.
Thank you, Maggie.
We're not going to be wanting a bit of puff when we get that publisher. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you.
We have a question saying, can Sadie and the Sea Dogs be pre-ordered? Which is from Karen in New Jersey, which it very much can. Yes.
Yes.
Online. It's Hikari Press. I'll type that into the chat. And oh, Graham Lester George, Maureen, your tireless versatility and great talent are so impressive and inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
We have news of people already pre-ordering the book. And Vered, who comes to us from Israel,
yes,
who joined us.
Remember Vered, yes.
Yeah. Who says, a beautiful poem. Thank you for this magical poetry event. Wonderful to see us. And she says, Shalom from Israel.
Ah, Shalom.
And so I think, yeah, I mean, but now we'll go on. Sorry.
Yes.
But we'll go on to some serious questions that you can get your teeth into now.
Oh, right.
If that's all right.
Right.
We've got 23 minutes left according to my clock. And so I saw way up here a question from Adam Feinstein, who is also here with us tonight.
Oh, lovely.
He says, Maureen, you were a good friend of my late mother, Elaine Feinstein. Elaine always insisted that poems should sing. In fact, I just found a poem of mine I showed to Elaine, and she wrote in the margin, good, but needs more music. Do you agree with Elaine on the importance of musicality in poetry?
Of course, I would agree with Elaine, who was a very, very fine poet and translator. And Adam may not know this, but I have a very old video of the very first interview that I did in London, and the person who interviewed me, and it began a long friendship, was indeed his lovely mother, Elaine. And I wondered if Adam would like to see that video sometime, or perhaps he might find it a bit painful. It was a very, very long time ago. But it's lovely that you've come, Adam.
Yes, it's lovely. It's lovely that you're here with us, Adam. And Adam's asked another question, so we'll just conclude. He says Elaine often expressed skepticism about the excessive use of rhyme in poetry. She had lively discussions about this with the Russian poet Joseph Brodsky, who insisted that good poems should rhyme. Of course, Elaine herself could not resist using rhyme, especially to conclude her poems. In the last few months of her life, I was able to talk to her about my decision to preserve the rhyme of the great Nicaraguan poet Rubén Dario's poetry in my new English translations, in order to maintain the crucial musicality of the Spanish original. What do you think about the use of rhyme in poetry, Maureen?
It makes it very much easier to remember, is one thing. But I think the influence of the medieval on me was so strong that it sort of led me towards not continuing to use rhyme like everybody else. I mean, after all, I started writing poems, little poems, apparently, when I was about 6. So I did rhyme for a long time, and then I fell over Dylan Thomas, and I suddenly realized the possibility of not rhyming, which was then further encouraging me by, as I say, Old English and medieval verse. So I find that now I don't rhyme, except that sometimes and indeed I think quite often, I internally rhyme, and I do hope and believe in the musicality of poetry.
Adam, and of course you have engaged with music. You've written a biography on Henry Purcell.
Oh, indeed, yes, my favourite. One, well, everybody has their own view, but in my view, he's the greatest English composer.
And you also talk about a lot about your dalliances with folk music in your younger days.
Oh yes. I used to. I did sing a lot of folk songs, often in pubs, I have to say, and did a lot of dancing as well. We had a folk club at my school, and we had a great deal of fun. And on a birthday I had recently, I had a letter from, I suppose, or you could say my best friend at school, Mari Goldstein, who was the most beautiful dancer and also singer of folk songs. And we used to go to Settlers Wells together. They weren't even seats. You stood up at the back, leaning on the sort of back of the gallery, and we saw all sorts of things there. And Maureen went on dancing and dancing for many, many years, and sadly for her has had to now give up because, like me, dancing doesn't come easily in your 80s.
But in your King's days, you were a member of the folk dancing club.
Oh yes, yes.
I think on the Strand lines you can find a picture of you. I think you said it's one of the last times wearing a skirt on the dance floor.
Yes, maybe. Yes, yes. But there was an enormous recrudescence of English folk, both dance and song, just sort of at the end of the war. And I'm not sure, we all used to go to Cecil Sharp House and dance there all evening, and it was great fun, and I very much hope that it still goes on. Because you can enjoy part of your national culture without being a nationalist.
Yes, and as you know, that's what I'm learning lots about here in Italy, and which we explored a bit together last year at the event with in which we enjoyed Italian folk music and Maureen's poetry inspired by folk tradition, which was the last, the penultimate poetry collection, also published by Pottery Press, Past Present, in which we find Piers well, your riff on Piers Plowman, Piers Plowless, and Sir Orfeo, the medieval folk fairy tale.
Well, it's a retelling of the Orpheus myth, isn't it, as an English fairy tale?
Yes, yeah, yeah. And we'll indeed be publishing some of that work in Italian, as I mentioned earlier on.
Right.
So Adam says that he would love to see the video with you and Elaine, and he says thank you for the fascinating memory of the interview and for your fascinating comments on the use of rhyme and your wonderful poetry. And he's used, yeah, and then he says he repeated the word fascinating.
Yeah.
Not good style, but true. So there's another question here from somebody called Charles Tolkien Gillett, who says, hello, I've recently finished my BA at King's in 2019. And so it was always very inspiring to be working on the Strand, as you were as well. Thank you very much for all you have done in your career to promote authors' rights, as well as so many social causes, and to keep traditions of medieval English literature alive and connected to the present. It's been lovely to hear you today, and I'm so looking forward to seeing a copy of Wanderer soon. I was wondering if you would be happy to speak more about why you initially found yourself drawn particularly to Old English poetry, its language and the themes we find in it, and what keeps you close to it today.
At school, usually for exam purposes, we get Chaucer, and very, very good too, very fine, etc. But there's a whole behind Chaucer. There's a whole legacy of writing in whatever was the current form of English, and so I was intrigued to know, but to find this when I got to King's, and that it was a very important part of the curriculum, because in those days, I'm not quite sure what happens now, but in those days, if you failed your Anglo-Saxon exam at the end of the first year, you were booted down to something general. So, of course, you know, everybody was very keen. But I have long had a passion for history. Since it was a whole unexplored area that we simply didn't get at school, we sort of stopped at the Romans, and then we picked up again somewhere sort of in the Renaissance. So there was this great lacuna, and I was absolutely fascinated by it, and have continued to be so ever since, and do regard it as a very important plank in the history lit, as it were. So I hope that it continues to be explored and studied, and to constantly find new life with other people. It is part of the continuum of English literature.
Absolutely. And yeah, exploring the linguistic diversity within English as well is also rather good fun.
Yeah.
The past versions of English that we have.
And the dialect versions that we have.
Yes. And of course, dialect is, the London dialect is what you talk about in another of your poems in Wanderer, Mother Tongue. Can you tell us a bit about that London dialect? Because that's a wonderful, exciting poem.
My family, on my mother's side, I knew nothing about my father's side, came originally from East London, Stratford, East, and so we grew up with a great deal of local words and imagery and so on, and a passion for never saying anything straight if it could be in some way sort of cheered up with a pun or an image of some sort. A great desire to manipulate the language, so that received pronunciation and standard English didn't really appeal to us. And I think in some ways that's also part of the basis of my poetry, just a sheer passion for imagery and strange expressions, and I won't sort of go into any of them now, but if you do read Mother Tongue, you'll find a great many old, I suppose you would call them Cockney expressions, certainly East London language that I grew up with.
And we have some further musings from Maggie about language here and Old English. She says, do you think maybe when anonymous poems like Wanderer and Seafarer survive, it's the purest form of survival, just the words, the themes, or is it just luck? Or is it Old English itself, the alliteration, the rhythm?
Well, of course, there is, as you rightly say, Maggie, masses of alliteration, and the rhythm is terrific. So, you know, it earns its place, um, certainly by that. But why things survive, or indeed why they don't survive, is one of the great mysteries of, you know, because all sorts of things come into play, like fashion and politics and the changing times. And can we write a poem today that doesn't mention Zoom? uh, we can try, but you know, it is a reflection of the time in which it was written, as well as we all hope, those of us who do it, that it has something more permanent than that.
I'm reminded of again of coming back to Paper Wings and the discussion you had with Liz back in 2015, talking about her challenges setting your love poems with lines such as "my email's down," and another one which the subject matter of a draining board.
Well, draining board is easier than emails, I think. It has more substance. Yes, I'm just showing my anti-technology side now. So I have to be grateful to it for making today possible.
Indeed. Liz, is there anything you'd like to say just before we sign off? Because you made such a wonderful contribution, and obviously it's been equally appreciated in the chat.
Really, just it's such a pleasure to hear Maureen read the poems, and they are so moving, and they are so wonderful on the page, but how they live in her reading and in her, it's not a performance, it's Maureen's voice alive within the poems. And that's a very, very special experience for me, and I think for all of us. So thank you for bringing all this together, Katie. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Liz and Maureen, and also those who are off screen. Thank you so much to Robin Shooter from King's, who's helped us get through the technological quagmire to reach you. Or we hope that we've reached you, because and the feedback on the chat is giving me hope, but it's very bizarre doing these virtual events. But I do hope that you'll all delve into Maureen, especially with all this spare time the lockdown is giving to some of us. Hopefully it might be a nice diversion, the material that you can read on Strandlines, all the voices that brings together, as well as Liz said, Maureen's voice, which is so important in so many ways, in so many dimensions, literally, vocally, verbally, on the page and off it, and touches so many lives. Yeah, the chat love keeps coming through, Maureen. I'm not going to carry on reading it.
No.
but perhaps well, we can talk about it afterwards. I'll fill you in. Maureen, I wanted to ask you really one last thing, is that you treat, as we've heard in the poems today, quite dark and difficult themes. We've had the difficulty of exile and of immigration and of violence against women, both of which I think we could call shadow pandemics, or perhaps things that this pandemic is throwing into shadow. when of course it shouldn't do. And we've all been reminded of those things that are going on. But your poetry and your writing, I don't know, I find anyway, it's sort of signature of yours is that it ends on a positive note. And you always find that glimmer of hope at the end. Is that something you do intentionally?
No, I don't think it is intentional. I think it just happens. It's probably something to do with my obstinacy in not giving up or giving away or something. But it's not intentional. It is, as I say, something that happens. And you know, in the Wanderer collection, okay, there are some dark poems, but there are also some quite light ones as well. I know one that Liz likes particularly and illustrated beautifully is Trackside, about all the wild flowers and things you can see out of the train window as you're going along, which is quite a cheerful poem on the whole. Yes.
And Liz is, yeah, if anybody as I can see Liz, then she is giving us a little visual demo of Trackside.
Maureen, read that.
Maureen, would you like to end the event by reading Trackside?
Oh, what page is it on, Liz?
Here we go, 18.
18. Oh, right.
Straight after Mosaics.
Oh, yes. Ragwort, Buckler, Valerian, Rose Bay Willow Herb, Elder, and Oxeye Daisy. Embroider Trackside with their tapestry skeins on a canvas of cow parsley. Bindweed. Going nowhere, seeing us whirling by, they now nod sagely, knowing in their green veins their seed too will travel, hitching the breeze, while their empty husks whisper goodbye, waiting for winter to size them down, still waving their heavy summer stems as we pass, going somewhere or nowhere, as the backdrop of woods and fields slides away, green and growing.
I think, unfortunately, it's my duty to speak, but I sure would much rather end on Maureen's wonderful last words and her poetry. Yeah, there's little more for me to say. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and for all your wonderful comments on the chat. John Deegan wants the pandemic to end immediately so he can come and see us. And yeah, normally what we do at this point is go and have a glass of wine. So although we can't do that together, I hope we might be able to all do it and reflect on this very special event tonight, and stay lifted. See it as a positive note in all this. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Katie, and everybody for making this happen.
Katie, thank you, Maureen.